um, fancy theater, with all the gilding and the whole bit. And they used to show one show, but by the time I was a kid, they had split it in half, and they had two shows. But it
Uh,
was just so beautiful to go see it.
Well, you used to be able to go to movies at Radio City Music Hall, because I
yeah.
did that as a kid with the Rockettes at intermission. It was great.
In Oakland, they have the Paramount Theater, and I don't know if they do it, well, obviously not right now, but for the longest time, even before I moved here, they once a month they had movie night, and so they had they had the the newsreel and the cartoon and the drawing and then the main feature, and it was I don't know if you've ever been to the Paramount in Oakland, but it's one of the first of the movie theaters that they went back and restored as it was originally.
They did the Paramount in Portland too. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
It really
Where
is.
is that, Deb?
It's down on Broadway, kind of over by Columbia Sportswear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I know where you're talking
it's
about.
where the
the
symphony
theater.
plays and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That was an old theater, and it was the Schnitzer family, the Steele family. They put all the money into it, and it really is spectacular. And I'm telling you, the acoustics really are amazing in those old places. They were built for that, to be able to project. And when I saw what was it recently? Something, but it was just really a jewel for the city when they did that back. And it was around the time I was there in 80, or maybe a little bit before. I think they had finished it, but for the time they had put a lot of money into it. But they did all the gold leaf, they did all the, I mean, it's really lovely. But
and this relates to sewing how?
What's that?
What, Christy?
I'm just curious about, I thought we were going to talk about sewing drapes for movie theaters.
No. I was waxing eloquent about the Castro Theater in San Francisco.
Oh, the Castro,
so
sure.
It's like no connection to tonight's.
Although I don't know, I'm sure there could have been some feathery effects.
Well, but yeah, it's well, yeah, go ahead, Meredith.
In Moscow, there's a cemetery where all of the headstones relate to what made the people famous.
Uh-huh.
And so the guy that designed the drapes for the Bolshoi has that on his tombstone.
Oh, there you go.
Speaking of drapes, so this is just a little story, and then we'll get into fabric feathers, which is our topic for tonight. I had never seen Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Okay. Now I had heard, because I just moved to San Francisco. I was.
And that's my excuse for being as crazy as I am. I did see it when I was a child.
I did, so anyway, so I knew the line, but you are Blanche. That's all I knew. I didn't have any context. So I went, it was playing at the Castro Theater. They opened up the balcony. There were like 2,000 gay men in this theater, okay? So of course we're sitting there, and there's that point where Blanche says, "You wouldn't be so mean to me if I weren't in this wheelchair." And I did not know what was coming, but 1,999 gay men inhaled. And then when Betty Davis said, "But you are, Blanche, you are," when they inhaled, I could feel this draft pulling my hair back. It created a microclimate. And then when they said, "But you are," it went the other way. And it was the weirdest thing. I mean, I am not kidding. 1,999 gay men inhale at the same time. It creates a draft. And so, yeah.
I used to yell that out at midnight at the Embers, which was a gay bar in Portland back in the 80s. I used to frequent with my buddies. And at 12 o'clock, that would usually come out of everybody's head.
So anyway, okay. So this evening, we are going to be covering fabric feathers. I guess before we start the program, does anybody have any questions from yes, no, maybe? Okay, then. So as I like to do, I'm going to start with a little gallery of fabric feathers, how I've used them. Then I will go into the how-to. So let us begin. Let's see. Come on. Hang on. One moment, please. There we are. That's what I'm looking for. Screen. There we are. Okay, so, and again, holler out questions if you have them. Hello, I'm Kenneth D. King. This class is fabric feathers. A lot of people don't use real feathers these days because of the animal rights movement and so forth. And I've started using fabric feathers in their place. This particular piece is an example that you will be seeing in the class. How the class is going to work is, first there will be a gallery of pieces that I have made with fabric feathers. Then I will talk about tools and materials. And finally, we'll get to the lessons. So let's get busy. This little organza sweater has a collar of fabric feathers. You can see there are little beads on it. I'll give you a close-up when I lay it on the table. Here's a little close-up of the body of this sweater. This is one of my souffle garments. So the shape is achieved through manipulation. And you can see that there are little ribbons with little beads as well on the body, and that's what holds the smocking. But the collar itself is what we're going to be looking at for this, this section of fabric feathers. Now I will take her off the form, we'll lay her on the table so you can get a better look at what we're going to be making. So here we are with the little sweater on the table. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. First off, for those who are curious, there's my label. So panning down, really what this is, you can see are little beads tied to the ends of these loops. Some are just loops that are cut. Others have beads tied to the end. But I'll demonstrate how we create this. There is how it is attached to the inside of the neck edge of this. And then let's pan down a little bit so you can see the body a little more close up. So while ribbons are not feathers, it gives sort of a feather-like texture. So there you have one example of fabric feathers. The next piece here is a shawl. It's really a long oval. And this is the lining. I'll have close-ups in a little bit. And then this outside, here are the fabric feathers. So you can see here, let me turn it over. This is the back. All of this texture is created by smocking and other fabric manipulation. So essentially, this is a single layer. It's not a case of you make the garment, you make the lining. It all occurs at once. So when we turn it onto the face, you can see that, again, with the little ribbons and the beads, those hold some of the smocks, but these little double-ended feathers hold other smocks. And I will diagram out what this looks like. This is just a double-ended piece. And so, again, another example of fabric feathers. This is a boa. And if you watch my videos before, you may have seen it. But it's good to see the feathers themselves. These feathers are not just cut with a stencil cutter, they're actually burned. See that weird little uneven edge? It gives you a little different look than cutting with a stencil cutter or cutting and unraveling. So you have 3 different looks that you can create with these fabric feathers. Just to give you an idea of how much fabric this eats up, because it eats up quite a lot of fabric. In this boa, which measures about 50 inches long and 8 inches wide, I used, I want to say 20 yards of organza. So you're going to be using a lot to create this lavish effect, but it's a fabulous effect.
That is so beautiful.
This is what it looks like right side up. The other one was upside down, but it's a good coat.
Gorgeous.
This is the cocoon coat that you saw in the picture before this section. So what I'm doing here really is sort of a flyby. So I think it would be instructive for you to see, first off, just some detail. So what you see here, you have some little ties that look somewhat like feathers. It's just fun to see. There is the detail on the inside. So the smocking and the fabric manipulation are what create the shape on this particular cocoon coat. Just
So how much fabric are you using for the base layer?
this coat was, I want to say, 25 yards total between the coat itself
Oh,
and the feathers. The pattern actually weighs more than the coat. The pattern is gigantic. There are maybe 2 seams. They're like 10 inches long. I'm not going to tell you where they are, but yeah, it eats up a lot of fabric. But what we're looking at today are the feathers. This is a little different than the others because you can see here, see how the feathers are frayed on the edges. You can do that too. So if you're working with a man-made fiber, you could actually cut with a stencil cutter, which we're going to cover. If you're working with a natural fiber, or this is man-made fiber, you can fray the edges. It gives a completely different look to the feathers. But I think it's instructive to talk about fabric feathers because they're used quite a lot and there are some variations in them which we will look at in the lessons. Okay, so questions.
so you're not sewing those in.
Well, okay, it depends, because I'm going to talk about the gathering and all of that sort of at the end of the lesson.
Oh, okay.
So on the collar, what I did was I made bunches of them, gathered them up, and then did a 3-thread roll hem, and like there were maybe like 5 or 6 rows whip stitched together and then attached. And like on the collar, same thing. You could see just a little bit of it when I showed you how they're attached. Then they're tied to the edge, and the volume of it sort of covers the join.
Uh-huh.
And so on the wrap with the double-ended feathers, those are just tied. So there are different ways of attaching them onto a garment. You could stitch them, and actually you'll get to see Zombie Francie. Zombie Francie is going to show us some of the ways. I'm going to be making a little skirt for her as my demonstration. And so you'll get to see some of the ways that I attach. So there are different ways of working.
When you
So
do
Kenneth,
some,
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. When you do something like that, do you know where you're going when you start, or is your process very organic?
kind of.
Kind of which,
Well,
or both?
the souffle, that's all generated with algebra.
Okay.
And so, that particular thing, it's sort of like I repeat patterns, and so the souffle coat, before that there was the big organza cocoon coat, and then I started kind of figuring out, okay, for this one I wanted to have this kind of neckline, I want it to be a little shorter and that sort of thing. And then the fabrics the determine something too, because that brick red fabric was it was perfect for the inside, but then it has a layer of the black organza over, and then
Mhm.
there's the trick of like getting the little ties on the outside. That was a whole I do a lot of sampling.
Okay.
And so, that took about 3 years to kind of figure out how you make a complex garment like that with a minimum of seams or no seams. So, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but
No, it helps. Yeah.
okay. So Deb, you had a question?
Yeah, so you said there's 3 different ways. So one, you cut and burn, and you get that kind of cool little feathery, weird thing from the
And then
burn.
there's a stencil cutter.
And then and is it a stencil cutter that you use to do before you burn, or you can use a rotary, I assume?
You'll see. I have a
Okay.
video on that.
And then the other, so is there 3? I guess my question is it 3 or is it 2?
Well, there are 3 different ways to
Maybe
finish.
unraveling is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's unraveling, there's the burned edge, and then there's stencil cut edge.
Okay, so it is
Those are
3 different.
the 3 different methods. And so, yeah. So, okay. So what other questions?
So wait, I have a question too. So just back to the fabric. So
Yeah.
for burning it, it's going to be the poly that you told us to do for these samples. But for the other 2 methods, can you use silk organza,
For the unraveling, you could use the silk.
but not for the stencil cutting?
Yeah, because see, this is something. When I was in college, I had a textiles professor who really adored polyester, and I was a brat then. And I was like, oh, I couldn't let a man-made fiber touch my body. But honestly, for this particular body of work, it's all made possible by man-made fiber, thermoplastics to be specific. And I love it now for the same reason that she loved it. And one of the things is the wrap with the green lining. That's actually been washed once. They're very easy to maintain, because all you do is you fill your bathtub up, put a little wool line in it, and then rinse, roll it in a towel, and it's clean. If you made all of that out of silk, first time you sat on it, it would be squashed like a bug and it would never fluff out. Whereas man-made fibers, you can live with it. You don't have to be terribly careful. So yeah, so these, you can use the burning, and you could use the burning and the unraveling on the silk. But the stencil cutter is really something that works on man-made fibers, specifically thermoplastics. Won't really work on rayon, because rayon is a cellulose fiber. Kind of a long answer to the question.
So it won't cut through it?
Not on rayon. I mean, it'll kind of burn through, but it'll take forever, and then it's going to look burned anyway. So I tend, of course, I'm not a big fan of rayon anyway. So that's just a personal thing with me. So, okay, other questions? Okay, then. So now let's begin. The construction. Here we are. Okay. And we're off. This is Zombie Francie. She's going to be helping me demonstrate the lessons on fabric feathers. She's wearing a fabric feather skirt, and at the beginning of each lesson, she's going to model the
I
results.
don't have video.
Create. Oh dear. So let's see. Let's try this again. Stop the share. We had this happen. Okay. Fabric feathers. Okay, so can you see now? This is Zombie Francie. She's going
Yeah.
to
So black.
demonstrate the lessons. Still black. Well, damn. Okay, well, let's see. Let's try something here. Stop. Huh. Okay, well, it's recording. Huh. Let's see. Let me quick time and try it again here. Technical things, wouldn't you know? Okay. Fabric feathers. Here we are. Let's see. Feather construction. Okay. So. Okay. Please work. Please work. Please, internet gods. Please work. That's my tech support here. Okay. Does everybody see an image here?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's give this a try here. Okay. So we'll. This is Zombie Francie. She's going to be helping me demonstrate the lessons on fabric feathers. Can we see it now? Are we good? Oh, good.
Is
Yeah.
that her bar jacket?
Yep.
It's a variation of the bar jacket,
At the
yes.
beginning of each lesson, she's going to model.
This was the muslin for the bar jacket.
Create. So let's get started. The techniques that I'm going to be showing you will require gathering, but I'm going to leave the gathering clear till the end because it's sort of its own separate thing, but I've combined it with this lesson here as well. So when you see Zombie Francie in her skirts, they've all been gathered using one of the methods that I outlined at the end of the video.
Isn't she pretty?
When you're burning the edges for the burned edge feathers, you really only need two things. First of which is denatured alcohol. Now, people have asked me, why denatured alcohol? Well, you're going to fill some kind of oil lamp. This is a little votive that I replaced the oil with the denatured alcohol. You could get, any kind of oil lamp or alcohol burning lamp from a jeweler supply. So you're going to be filling that with the denatured alcohol. Now, the denatured alcohol will not leave ash on your fabric, which is very important. You could use a candle, you could use a cigarette lighter. There are all sorts of things you could use, but the drawback with especially candles is it will leave soot on your fabric, which is not something you want. Having an alcohol flame, this is not lit just yet. Having an alcohol flame in a little holder like this makes it much easier to control the edge of the fabric over the flame. One thing I would strongly encourage you to think of, though, is safety, safety, safety. You light the alcohol burner when you're using it, you blow it out immediately when you're done. Don't let it sit and burn because you could burn your house down. I don't want you to do that. So these two tools here really are what you would use for flame finishing the feathers. We start with our fabric that we're going to make the feathers from. We also have our little lamp with the denatured alcohol and a lighter to light it up and a rotary cutter. These are what you're going to be needing. Next, the process. As I think it's useful to diagram things out before we actually go to the fabric, that's what I'm going to do. So this represents a piece of fabric cut. It can be lengthwise grain, crosswise grain. This distance here can be any depth you want, any length you want, but this is just to start. For the feathers with the burned edge, you would take a rotary cutter, really, and you're just making a cut a zigzag cut. And you don't have to be terribly even with this if you don't want, because feathers are naturally occurring, and so they're not perfectly symmetrical. So the red line represents the cut, and after you cut it, you would just take it loose, open it out like so. That will prepare your fabric for the next step, which is burning the edges. As outlined on the whiteboard, we use the rotary cutter to make our cuts. And these can be as long and narrow or fat as you choose. This is entirely up to you, the designer. Making this jagged sort of sawtooth edge like so. Then you pull these apart and you have 2 rows of your feathers. The next step will be singeing the edges. Light your alcohol flame. Now you can see the flame is not very visible. That's okay. Safety first, safety first. You light it, you use the alcohol flame, you always blow it out when you're not working. You have to light it several times, all good. So really what this is, and this is practice. I make it look easy because I've done a lot of it. So you're just gonna run sometimes it singes a little more evenly, sometimes it creates the little beads. But with a thermoplastic, which is what this is a nylon. I'll zoom in a little more so you can see that. With a thermoplastic, this will make it so that the leaves do not ravel or get ratty looking. This takes some time. And some practice. I can't tell how many times I've set an entire piece of fabric on fire. So you want to be careful with this. The reason, again, like I said before, you use alcohol is because alcohol does not leave soot. If you were going to be using a candle, that would work on a fabric that didn't show dirt. But it's better to use the alcohol flame because it's clean. If you talk to anyone who makes jewelry, if they're making lost wax castings, they always work with an alcohol flame specifically for that purpose. Okay, so now blow that out. I'll show you close up. That is the edge you're going to get. It'll make a slight little black mark along the edge as well. That's okay, that's as it should be. So when you're choosing which one to use, know that this edge is going to be a little more irregular. It's going to have a little black bead on it. So I wouldn't recommend this one necessarily for white fabrics. This works better with colors. Next, you'll see how it's made up and how it looks Zombie Francie. And here we have lovely Zombie Francie wearing the feather skirt with the burned edges. Isn't she lovely?
Okay.
Oh, did you put something under that to poof it out?
No, actually I didn't. Let me just run that back just a teeny bit. There she is. No, it's just the gathering that helped it out. Yeah, I have a little black kind of pencil skirt underneath that I stitch
Mhm.
everything to, just so she's modest. But yeah, it's just the volume of the fabric itself that holds it out. Okay, so now that's your first challenge. If you care to try some of this.
So how big a piece should we use?
You don't have to use a big piece for this. If you know, if you have like, if you have a half yard, say about 8 or 10 inches by 18 inches would be good for just a little sample.
Kenneth, is there a hot knife that does this instead of the flame? Because I have too much of a stash to burn.
Well, that's coming. That's coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted to tell you, I thought your Barbie looked like Nicole Kidman a little bit there.
Which one? Oh, you mean Barbie, Zombie Francie?
Zombie Francie. She
Yeah.
looks like Nicole Kidman.
Well, you see,
A little.
Zombie Francie, she was my assistant's fit model because zombies can't get or transmit COVID. And so, she's the only one that my assistant could bring in to work on different fitting things. So yeah, because the other ladies are, like the Orloff Valensky triplets are going to be getting their vaccines tomorrow. So they got new dresses so they could, and they were sleeveless so they could, get their vaccines. So I know it's how I keep sane. It's crazy.
My husband just texted me that he volunteered to be in a drug trial in the little town near us for the AstraZeneca vaccine because he's 61.
Uh-huh.
And they don't like to give that to old people. So he's getting it like in 2 days or something. So
Oh, good.
He's really excited.
Well, I got my first shot last Saturday. It was just one of those out of the blue sorts of things. I was just thinking, well, I'm going to get it when I get it. And there's a gal at FIT who I'm friends with. There are the people who think they run things, and then there are the people who actually run things. She's one of those people who actually runs things. And she texted me on last week and said, can you talk? And when usually she says that, it's like, uh-oh, what's going on? So I called her. I said, is this good news? And she said, well, there's a friend of hers who was a student of mine who is working in he's working in a clinic in Harlem, and he contacted her and said, okay, who do we know that we want to have the shot, because professors now in New York anyway are eligible for the vaccine. So she said, would you like it? I said, absolutely, I would. So that is how I got it. It was sort of just a kind of a bolt out of the blue. I just had anticipated I was just going to wait until, but it kind of came to me. So I'm very grateful for that.
What kind did you get?
The Moderna.
He's
I
getting-
just like Dr. Fauci said, take any of them. I'm like, okay, I'll listen to Dr. Fauci.
The AstraZeneca one. The one from Oxford is the one he's getting. So.
Well, I think it's any one right now, I think is a good idea. So
he's asking me which one would you like, and I'm like, I don't really know which one I'd like. There's pros and cons, but I'm just gonna take whatever they say. I'm gonna poke this in your arm. I'll just give me that one, and I'll take that one. And
yeah, that was my feeling. Like, yeah, they know more than I. So yeah.
Now, are you set up for your second shot?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Awesome.
Appointment. Yeah. So yes, it's going to be like 9 o'clock in the morning in Harlem, but that means okay, I'll just shut my mouth and be there at 9 o'clock in the morning in Harlem. So,
Is there a trick to not? Sorry to interrupt you. To not singe in your point?
A tweezer.
Oh,
yeah,
that makes sense.
Our federal government has decided it would be wise to space the vaccines out by 4 months.
I don't understand.
I don't get it either. And as a medical professional, it like horrifies me because that's like, it's a new vaccine that we don't have data for that. And they're going, well, we'll reassess when we get there and maybe we'll change it. But our province, Ontario, hasn't gone that way yet. They're still saying they're going to booster in a month, but it's to try to get more shots in more people, and they're banking that 60% is enough.
I guess
Canadians are, it's just kind of, yeah, the liberal government is just, yeah, anyway. I love them. I'm liberal. It's just, you kind of want to shake them sometimes.
yeah, yes.
So they must have a supply problem with the AstraZeneca?
It's not a supply problem with the AstraZeneca. It's just like Canada is not like the US. We didn't like pay for any trials. We don't have any manufacturing here. So we kind of get what we can get. And
Yeah.
Pfizer stepped up and is going to give us more or sell us more, whatever. We're going to get more sooner than we thought. But with the AstraZeneca, it's not, they haven't approved it for use in older people. And my husband's 62. And so there's this pilot program they just announced today. He said that they are going to give it in smaller communities to older people I guess to see if it works. I'm in a situation like where we've had over the year, we have had 700 cases. And in our public health area, we've never had more than 200 active cases at once. And our public health area shuts it down really quickly. They'll quarantine 700-800 people. We're a 200,000 community, and they'll quarantine 700-800 people at one time, and contact trace. And we've only had one death. I was actually in the woods yesterday crying because I turned on our dashboard and looked, and there had been one person in hospital for weeks on a ventilator, and the number went from 1 to 0, and I went, oh my God, did they die? And I looked at the deaths, and it was still 1, and I literally like sat down on the ground and cried because this perfect stranger I didn't know lived.
Wow.
But we're really lucky. But what we have a problem with is we're right on the edge of cottage country. We're an easy drive from Toronto. We're an easy drive from Ottawa. So we get a lot of people from very dangerous areas coming here, and we are not thought to have any kind of immunity at all because there hasn't been the caseloads here. So it's I'm glad he's getting something. And so maybe 60%, maybe they're using smaller areas because the caseloads are lower and it'll be safer. I don't know, but I'm glad he's getting something anyway.
But what are they doing in the UK?
I have no idea. They went back to once. I think they're doing the boosters in a month. It's just, we don't.
But I mean, aren't they giving them to older people in the UK?
The UK, there's a really good article. If you Google something about UK and COVID vaccine, my husband got this really interesting article. And the UK, the woman that ran it was a friend of Boris Johnson's, and she's not really a vaccine scientist, but she's into drug procurement and stuff like that. And she made so many deals with so many different companies, and they basically took their population and used them as test subjects. And so they're getting a lot of whatever they want. They were allowed to or able to pre-buy so much stuff that they can pick and choose, you know, like here with Johnson & Johnson, I think the Johnson & Johnson, like they're probably going to use that here in homeless people in indigenous communities way up north where getting a second vaccine may almost be impossible kind of thing. Yeah. But as a I'm a veterinarian, and so having these recommendations to, you know, take this vaccine nobody knows squat about a virus that we don't know that much about. And hey, let's just go 3 months beyond the recommended.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry, Kenneth.
Yeah, back to class. Yeah. So how is everyone doing?
I'm burning.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, is this what you mean by an alcohol
Absolutely.
lamp?
That's perfect. Yes.
Okay, well, the denatured alcohol is not in here, but I mean, anyway, okay, I can use that later. One of the drawbacks besides the soot to a candle, which I was trying, is that it tends to, if you drop it, you get wax all over it.
Yeah.
So
Oops.
I'm not gonna, I tried several of those.
Was that you that I heard dropping something?
No, well, I don't know, I don't think, but anyway, so that, and the other question I have is, how much space should you leave at the cuts? Like, see, some of
At the
these
bottom?
are way too
Yeah.
wild.
If you have like 3/4 of an inch to an inch, you're fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you need
Okay.
a little bit. You need a little bit for the gathering, and a little bit for trimming. But about a
Okay.
3/4 of an inch is plenty good.
Okay, great. Yeah, because
Okay.
I wasn't sure and I was just going and.
Yeah. Well,
La, la, la.
it's kind of like, yeah, it's just kind of wail on it. So okay, so let's see how everyone's doing. Show me what you're doing here.
not the most
Okay.
beautiful thing. So I do have a question though. Do
Yep.
you want to make sure that there are points on both sides? So you're starting at the top and ending at the top?
Well, you can start at the bottom and end at the top, or you can start at the bottom and end at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. Because they're just roughly triangles. So, because when you're going to be gathering, you're going to be kind of feeding it all in and gathering it into one long string. So it doesn't have to be too exact.
Okay.
See, as someone who, I kind of like precision on certain things, this is kind of fun because it doesn't have to be exact because feathers occur in nature.
Yeah. No, imprecise work is difficult for me.
Yeah, I get that. Yes.
Same
Okay.
with me,
So
kind
question.
of hard with the candle.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So let's see. How we doing? Ready to move on to the next one?
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. So the next one is, oh, it's going to be exciting. You're going to love this. So let's try sharing this screen again. Can you see it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Isn't she lovely? Next, we have Zombie Francie modeling the skirt made from the stencil cut feathers. This actually is what I call the waste of the feathers, but stencil cutting is our next method of cutting feathers, and she's modeling it for us. When you're cutting out feathers, or actually any other objects with what's called a stencil cutter, you want to use man-made fibers: polyester, nylon, acetate. Cellulose fibers like rayon don't work. And these are the two pieces of equipment that you're going to need. This here is a sheet of glass. When we're working, you'll get to see a little more how I use this. And then this tool here, this is called a stencil cutter. This particular tool, it's heat. It's like a little soldering iron. This one comes from a company called Air Nouveau, AIRNOUVEAU. You can see it on the internet. What this is, what you're looking at here, is this is a tip that gets hot. And you use this tip, and the tip touches the glass because the glass does not melt. You don't want to use anything other than glass. So you can cut through any thermoplastic, any man-made fiber with this by dragging the point of the stencil cutter against the glass. Now, an advantage of the glass, if you're cutting complex shapes, you could draw the complex shape on a piece of paper, put it underneath the glass, and use that as your guide if you're working with a transparent fabric like an organza. So, the two tools that we're going to need for feathers cut with the stencil cutter are sheet of glass and the stencil cutter.
Oh, when you said stencil cutter, I thought you were talking about like a circuit cutter.
No, this is the stencil cutter. There are different kinds. It's also called a hot knife.
Okay.
And so, any art supply store you can find them. This particular one I just like because it's small. And the quilting world has, that's where I actually found this, was the quilting world. They cut stencils out of acetate to transfer quilting patterns to quilts. And so that's where I first came to know this particular tool. Okay.
Kenneth, what about marble or granite? Like if you have a marble or granite countertop, that's pretty sturdy.
Yes, and now I've had people also use like a cookie sheet, metal.
Oh, yeah.
The thing you because I had a student one time try to use the stencil cutter with her cutting mat, and she cut, she scarred the mat, and I said, no, you need something that doesn't melt. So I just like the glass, and a little down in the video, you'll get to see more. I'm going to give you a little, you'll get to see a secret. But I do love the glass because it's relatively easy to get. I like 1/4 inch, then you don't have to worry so much about breaking it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so this is, we're going to graph out from our piece of fabric our cutting pattern.
Ended feathers. This is a case of no waste. So again, this is our piece of fabric, and I generally have a template, a cardboard template. So you're going to cut the feathers out like so. So the feathers will be separate. And then the beauty here is with the waist, after you have lifted the feathers out, you can then fold these two edges together and stitch them and gather them. So with this particular layout, you've created two types of feathers. You've created double-ended feathers that you can then tie on to whatever you wish to tie on. And you have created what I call organza ostrich. And when we go into fabric, you'll get to see a little more about how that works. Using the stencil cutter is, I think, the quickest and easiest and most finished way of making fabric feathers. Now this here, this is the stencil cutter I showed you earlier, and it's a heat tool. This one is by a company called Air Nouveau, AIRNOUVEAU. And so the little tip here is what gets hot. But one of the things you run into when you're cutting, as you're cutting, the tip gets coated with oxidized, see that there, oxidized plastic from the fabric. So I like to have a little penknife to scrape all that off periodically, because the more that accumulates, the less heat gets through the tip to the fabric. You can also see by the reflections here that we're working on a sheet of glass. A thicker sheet of glass works better than a thinner sheet, but it can be anything as long as it's glass, because you don't want to use this, which is a heat tool, against your cutting mat. What you'll run into is you'll just melt everything to the cutting mat, and it will be bad. So having a sheet of glass, whatever it is, a mirror, plate glass, your stencil cutter, your little pen knife, and your fabric. These are really what we need to get ready. Now, while you can use the stencil cutter to cut the zigzag, that's entirely up for use. Another thing I like to do is I like to make little dies and cut shapes. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be cutting feathers. I'm going to show you the feathers and then the waist. This here is one of my feather templates or
Fancy,
dies.
huh?
You can tell it's not very fancy. It's just a piece of cardboard with a little handle to hold on to. And I have made a small here so that we can use it to cut from this sheet of fabric. I've plugged in the stencil cutter, and the stencil cutter, again, safety first, safety first. If you're not using it, unplug it, because you could burn a hole in something. Usually it's burning a hole in something that you would rather not burn a hole in. So while my stencil cutter is heating up, I'm going to change camera angles, and then I'm going to demonstrate cutting feathers. First off, I apologize for the glare on the glass. Nothing to be done about that. These little dies that I make out of paper. This is just mat board. It can be what's called chipboard. The thing is, you don't want to make it out of plastic, because if you touch the stencil cutter against it, it's going to melt it. So paper, metal. So what this does here, and you move it fairly slowly, and then once you get going, you'll get kind of a rhythm. But you can cut each little feather out cut slowly enough, it should lift right out. This one I didn't cut slowly enough, so go back and make another cut. You can also use this free heat. I'm going to show you another trick after this that will just thrill and delight you. So each one of these, there's one of our feathers. So yes, I will cut a couple more on camera, then I will go off camera and cut more. So I'll have a finished piece when I come back. So here we are. Now the key here is not to go too fast. If you go too fast, you won't cut clear through, and you'll have to go back and recut. So each one of these lifts out, and there are feathers.
Like watching paint dry.
So I will go off camera and cut the rest, and I will meet you back here. Okay, we're coming to the end, and while I'm finishing up these last few feathers, I just thought I would tell you another extremely useful use for this particular tool. If you're cutting metallic fabrics, lames, anything that is a mylar, which is a man-made fiber, shiny fabrics, one thing that you'll notice is that if you cut them with scissors, the seam allowances just fray and turn into a mess almost immediately. If you use the stencil cutter and cut a single layer on glass, you can have a seam allowance that will stay intact through the entire construction process. But I use the phrase single layer. You don't want to cut both sides together because then you're going to end up bonding everything together. But single layer, cut these, you're going to have a sealed edge. Now, a pile of feathers. And
So does it end up with a bit of a rough edge?
It's a little, if you look at it really close, it's rough, but from a distance, it reads as a clean edge.
No, I mean against your body.
Against your body, not really. You know,
Huh.
it may be a teeny bit scratchy, but it's not terribly uncomfortable.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
it's unused.
Question? Other question?
Yeah, are you familiar with the Bernina cut work tool?
No, I'm not.
Because I have the embroidery software and I have the cut work tool, and I could design whatever feathers or shapes that I wanted.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking I could just stick it down, and the cut work tool actually cuts through the fabric.
So now the question, does it cut with heat or does it cut with a blade?
It cuts with a blade.
Okay, well, you see I mean, that would work, but the drawback is you would, over the life of the garment, it would fray very quickly. The beauty of
Yeah,
this particular
okay.
thing is that it doesn't fray at all.
Okay.
You have to really work at it to get it to fray.
Yeah, it's like it's more like a needle that has 4 different sides to it.
Uh-huh.
And it just you rotate the sides, so it's cutting but it does cut rather than burn.
Okay.
But you know, I could try it just to see what it would do.
Yeah, why not?
Be
Okay.
fun.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so there.
For the waist. And what I like to do with the waist is fold it together, and you can offset a little bit. And then you run that through the ruffler, and you get what I call curled ostrich. I'll show you more on that later. This again is Zombie Francie in her curled ostrich skirt. In order to transform this particular feather into something different, we need a tiny, tiny crochet hook. This is a size 11. You can see it is quite small. You also want, these are called a 5/0 seed bead. The object here is that you want the seed beads to pass easily through the crochet hook. So I'm going to do a few here. So the object here is you grab one of the fabric loops. You have to pull hard against it to make sure the hook grabs it. Then you slide the bead onto the fabric, and then you take the hook through the fabric a second time, and again pull, and you can snap that fabric through a second time. There we are. And then finally, so I'm going to do this in an extreme close-up. So here we have the hook. We have the bead on the hook. And so we're going to get one of these fabric loops and then pull hard. Like so. Now give yourself a little bit of a loop because you're going to need that later. You could, if you wanted to, tie a knot right there. But the other way of securing it is just to pull it through twice. So again, you're going to run this up. Try not to catch the thread when you're running the hook through. Then I'm going to come in the hook through the fabric loop. So here we are. Then grab the fabric loop tightly again, and then pull a second time. There you go. And then you can just trim that off at an angle to make it pretty. So you've essentially gone through twice to hold that bead. I'm going to bead all of Zombie Francie's loops. Then you'll get to see her skirt with beads on it. And voila, beads on the loops. Doesn't she look lovely?
Doesn't she look lovely?
Now, Kenneth, I have to ask you, did you cut her hair or did you find her that way?
I found her that way. Yeah, the reason she's green is it's a thing called green ear, that the earrings that they put in are brass. And
Oh,
yeah. So, you know, there's no way of getting rid of it. So it's part of her character. She's Zombie Francie. Okay, so questions. Would you like to give that a try, or would you like to move on to the next one?
I'd have to go and find the right crochet hook. And
Okay.
that might take more time than I want to take right
Okay,
now.
fair enough. So does anyone here have a stencil cutter, or would you like to move on to the next one? You do?
I do have one.
Okay, well,
Yeah, I have one right here. It's plugged in.
yeah, so yeah, make a little sample with, you know, cut the little double in, and you can freehand those if you need to.
I just cut mine with my rotary cutter because that's all
You
I
can
have.
do that too. Yeah. You know, I have actually cut those with the rotary cutter and done the alcohol flame as well. So you can sort of mix and match these techniques.
I used a beeswax candle because it's all I had, and I just moved really quickly. And if I didn't stop, it didn't burn. It just turned white.
Yeah. Well, you see, there you go.
Kenneth, will that stencil cutter work on natural fabrics?
No,
Okay.
no, it's thermoplastics. And that's why, you know, it won't really work on rayon, because rayon is a cellulose fiber as opposed to a petroleum fiber. So nylon, acetate, polyester, you know, thermoplastics.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I wish I could find this professor from college, because I really did give her a lot of grief. And, you know, I feel bad that, you know, I gave her all of this grief when I was a college student. And, you know, I want to find her and say, you know, I really now like it for the same reasons you did. I understand now why you liked polyester. And this is something I talk to my students at FIT about, is know your textiles, know your fiber, you know, be intentional about the use of your fiber, because these, like the cocoon coat and the little sweater and the wrap, it's a paradox because it's transparent, but it's warm because polyester is hot to wear. So if you have all of those little pockets of air, it's, you know, it captures it, you know, you can't go out in a blinding blizzard in it, but it's warm, surprisingly warm, and easy to maintain. And that's why my customers like these. I remember the first time I had a client, it was she bought just a solid black one of the little sweater, and so she called me one day and was asking me, you know, should I take it to Madame Paulette and have it cleaned? And I said, no, come on over, I'll show you how to do it. And so, you know, I just turned the faucet on in the sink, you know, and I'm just, you know, going at it and rolling it, and she kind of went, ah, but you know,
Which reminds me what my father, who was the dry cleaner, used to say. He did not like polyester, obviously, when it came out. And he said, polyester, you don't want to go with those two girls.
well, you know, it
was the beginning of the death of the industry that supported my big family for a long time.
Well, you know, I did an article on Madame Paulette, the dry cleaner, for Threads magazines a while back. It's amazing how much not dry. It was amazing how much water they used. I was really quite surprised.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So how we all doing? We having fun?
Yeah.
How about you, Christy? Are you having a good time?
I am having a good time. I'm having a new hot water heater installed as this class is going on.
Oh, how wonderful.
I'm a nervous wreck, but the water heater blew up last night and flooded the laundry room.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just grateful they're here, and
Oh.
I love this class. I'm having the best time.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So, still working? So would we like to continue?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's continue then. So, get to see Zombie Francie again. Okay, there we are. And we continue.
Zombie Francie is modeling one way to use the double-ended feathers. One of the ways of using the double-ended feathers that you cut out is by sewing them individually onto a garment. You can see here little dots on Zombie Francie's skirt, and this is how they sew on. If you're going to be sewing onto a skirt, you start at the bottom and you work your way to the top. So we'll take one of these, fold it roughly in half so you know where the center is. And then, so a little tiny running stitch. You stitch back into the hole, and it will gather. Then you can pop that over, and you can repeat. Again, I'm going to come up to here. Find roughly the center of the feather. And little running stitch. And you go back into the fabric where you emerged. Draw it up. And you can sew these down in varying densities. That is just entirely up to you. What I'm going to do is go off camera and sew the rest of them to this skirt so you get to see what a mass of them look like. And here, Zombie Francie models the results of the double-ended feathers stitched to the skirt. This leaf jacket has no seams. It's made by cutting leaves out of the organza with the stencil cutter.
Now I'm telling a secret here. This is like a little bonus information.
You look at it in the photograph, you can't see any darts or seams because it is constructed as one continuous piece of textile. This is close-up of the fabric. So all of those leaves that I'm going to show you how to cut make up a fabric. I'm not going to tell you how I do that, but I'm going to tell you how to cut the leaves because you can make feathers the same way. This is the other trick I'm telling you about. I've shown you already the little jacket and the little detail. And so this is just something good to know. This is leaves, but you can make feathers out of this. That's why I throw it in with this particular section. This is just a piece of paper with the leaves that I like to cut out drawn on it. And these here, you see I've worked ahead. I have leaves for other projects. And it's just really a piece of cardboard or foam core with little straight pins coming up. That helps you to control everything, to keep it all in order. And really, how it works, it's so much fun. What you're going to do here really is, this is where you use the little penknife to hold everything down. You're just following this line. So you're just drawing on the lines. So you don't have to be artistic. You will get a little bit of variation just because you're doing this by hand. But this is how I cut all the little leaves for my leaf tops. The huge secret, someone asked me, well, are you going to tell them how you get it all together? No, that you're going to have to figure out on your own. But this one here, this is like the poor man's laser cutter. I mean, if you really want to sum it up in easy terms to understand.
Have you ever sent it off to be laser cut?
You could, but it takes, I guess it depends on how much you need. I have found that this is actually quicker.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because this is, there are times that I don't want to say dead time, but, there are times that like, I don't really want to do anything mentally taxing, but I know I need to get something done. And so I'll just sit down and cut a bunch of leaves. So,
because laser cutting would do the same to the edges, wouldn't it?
Exactly. It's exactly the same. So like I said, I call this the poor man's laser cutter. So,
Okay.
And for the kind of quantities that I need, having this done laser cutting it was not cost effective for me.
Is that because you need too many or you don't need enough?
Don't need enough. Also, because see, the other thing, when you're having something laser cut, you have to pay to have the program programmed and digitized. And that tends to run into a little bit of money. If you do a lot of it, then you can save money because you can reuse the program. But to input all of this into the program there's a setup fee that I don't want to pay.
Well, I would imagine too that by doing it by hand, you get a bit of more of an organic look, obviously. If
True,
it's,
yeah.
it looks a little more real,
Yeah, but yeah. So I mean, it's not I just found it worked at it for my particular purposes. It works really well.
I'm going to do one, then I'm going to give you a close up because I think it's pretty close up how it works. But what's so beautiful about this is that it doesn't take that long. And then see, you lift them out, and what I would do is lift them out as I'm going and put them on the pin to contain everything, so that when you're done, everything is stacked up neatly. It doesn't go scattering all over the place. But yes, this stencil cutter, it's from the quilting world. You can get them in art supply stores as well. But it is one of my secret weapons. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera and adjust the camera so we can have a close-up of this.
There we go. Sorry about the minimal production crew here.
I'm so surprised that the fabric doesn't shift around while you're cutting it.
Well, you want to hold it down with the pen knife,
back.
and it'll kind of
Like I
stick
said,
to the
with
glass
little
after
pen
a time.
knife, you can use that to clean up the tip of the stencil cutter when it looks like it's getting coated with dark stuff. And you can also use it to hold the fabric against the glass, because it cuts cleaner if the fabric is held against the glass. Also, another thing to know about cleaner and not clean is that the glass, it's better that it have some residue of the plastic on it. So don't feel like you have to get out the Windex and clean the glass for every project. Having a little bit of dirt on it is better because it makes everything stick better. It doesn't slide around quite so much, which is a good thing if you're making multiples like this. So, a couple more. And it's kind of hypnotic. One of the things that I found, as far as people ask me, well, how do you know how many leaves to create? What I will do with the fabric is I'll take the pattern, lay it flat on the table, and lay one layer of fabric on it, completely covering all the pattern pieces. And so one layer of fabric size, because I generally cut 3 sizes of these leaves. I think it looks better. Okay, so now take that out. And cutting these leaves, there are days when I don't feel like doing anything else. I want some mindless activity. If I need to make phone calls, I'll just cut leaves. So, pen knife, stencil cutter, voila.
So I'm going to stop for a moment just to see questions, comments, responses. I'm not expecting you to do that this evening, but that's just a good little thing to know.
I'm just, it's like, I don't want to know a price, but I look at all the handwork that you do, and I just think, I hope that you charge. I'm sure you.
Oh yes, I
hope
do.
You charge what you're worth.
Yeah, well, part of when developing all of this, one of the things I had to do was to I had to really kind of keep track of, you know, I have it all in a formula. X number of square inches equals this much in man hours and this much in materials. So I can, what I do is I look at the pattern and I'll figure out roughly how many square inches is in the pattern. And then I price it per square foot. So yeah, so I make sure I charge, because why otherwise? Okay, other questions?
Yeah, so it seems like this would be another place where you could use, where you could borrow from quilting, because you know the temporary adhesives, seems like you could spray your glass and then just really smooth out your fabric and it would stay there.
Yeah,
I
but
would think
you know,
it's not
I've
enough.
got my riff down, you know, because see, I want it as uncomplicated as possible, and with as few kind of fancy tools. I mean, I'm a tool sort of guy, but something like that adds another layer that I think, you know, it for it wouldn't seem to add as much for me, because I kind of know how to do it. But you know,
Yeah,
if it worked better for you, I think that would be a great idea.
yeah, because probably I would wind up starting to cut and it would go woo.
Well, you know, you have your little picture there. You just follow the
Yeah,
line. Yeah.
right.
Okay. So other questions?
So
Yeah,
this turned out pretty mangled. Is this just a practice makes
it's a
perfect kind of
it's a practice
situation?
thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So Lori, did you have a question?
When you were sewing the folded feathers on, I missed it. Did you sewed the running stitch and then did you gather it with the running
Yes.
stitch?
Yeah, you just gather it down. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to do raveled feathers, and then I'm going to kind of go right into the gathering, so that you can see the different methods of gathering that I use. Here we are. Okay.
Francie is modeling a skirt made out of the raveled feathers. That is the next section. For the feathers with the raveled edges, the cut is a little different. You're going to cut them somewhat like this. And you can cut them either on the straighter grain or you can cut them on the bias. That just depends on what you're doing. So they're going to look something like this. If you cut them on the bias, where you have the straighter grain running this way, you're going to have what looks like, you know, you're going to have a straight grain here, and the rest of this here will ravel and it will look like feathers. You can cut it with the straighter grain running this way, and you're going to have more of a straight line across the ends. This is two different, there are two different effects from the same cut. So I will demonstrate both. For the raveled feathers, you really only need either a rotary cutter or a pair of scissors. It's a fairly easy one to do. Zoom in here. And really, fold, should zoom out a little bit here. The object is, you want to have a cut edge. This can be more pronounced or less pronounced. All of this
So
stuff.
excuse me, Kenneth.
Yeah,
You're not trying to get two separate pieces out of
No,
this,
that's
right?
correct. There's a lot more waste on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Understand when you're going to be doing something like this, since this is couture, you know, all expenses, none are spared. And so this one here, ravel. You could also, if you wanted to, cutting them like this, you could actually burn these under the alcohol flame. It would give a different look. So, a couple different ways of approaching this. So here, so you have these curved edges. And so now I'm not going to do this much on camera, but what you're going to do is just start picking it apart. This takes some doing. This takes a lot of patience, actually. But again, this is why you charge so much money for something like this. I decided to spare you watching me unravel all of these fabrics because it is rather like watching paint dry. But I wanted to show you two different outcomes. The top one here, which you'll get close-ups in a moment. This is if you cut the fabric with the lengthwise grain running square. The second one is if you cut the fabric on the true bias, so the lengthwise grain runs this way. So we will compare and contrast. What you see here is a straight line across and fringes. When you're unraveling, these don't have to sit dead parallel. You can have them staggered to create more of that illusion of feathers. The other way is if you cut on the true bias. Now you can see with the different colors in the warp and the filling, you have different colors showing here, and then you can see there is the crosswise grain, there is the lengthwise grain. So this creates, I think, a little prettier feather. And again, none of these have to be symmetrical. These are feathers. They should look natural. So you have a choice of cutting your strips on the bias or cutting on the straight grain. Once you have all of these cut, you then gather everything up, and we will see Zombie Francie in her feather skirt. Zombie Francie is here to introduce you to the next section, gathering. When I work with fabric feathers, I generally like to gather them. The double-ended feathers you can tie on, but the others depend on gathering to give them the fullness they need. So there are two methods, the first of which is using your long machine basting stitch and thread. This is the thread that I prefer. It's by Gutermann, Mara 30. Mara 30 is, it's essentially a buttonhole thread, and it's stronger than the shirring threads, so when you give it a good tug, it doesn't break. Mara 30. I will show you how I like to use this. The other device, this is what's called a ruffler. It's different than a ruffling foot in that it has this particular part attaches to the needle clamp. This is what attaches to the shank, and down here is where the action occurs. So every time the needle raises and lowers, there are two little leaf springs that the fabric goes between, and every time it makes a bite. You can also adjust it so that it sews with, makes a bite every 6 and every 12. So this is the adjustment, 6 and 12. So there you have it. This is called a ruffler. This is pretty much available for any household machine. I don't know if they have an industrial equivalent. I saw one once that was about $125. So what I would say is you can get this for not much money for your household machine, and it can be a ruffler foot. So these are the two methods. I will demonstrate how those work next. The first step is to wind the Mara 30 onto the bobbin and put it into the bobbin case. Then, as usual, you bring the lower thread, and you have the machine threaded. Next step is to loosen the upper tension. Don't take it all the way off, but loosen it about half of what you normally would. This will cause the thread to drop down below the bed of the machine, which is what you want. Next step, you're going to lengthen the stitch length all the way. I'm not showing you this that much because it's doing this little disco move, but you would lengthen the stitch as long as your machine will make it. Now, with our thread tension and the stitch length adjusted, I'm going to start sewing. I like to sew a double row. Hold your threads back. I try to keep the fabric flat while I'm sewing. You can let the thread do the gathering. Don't let the machine do it. Here, we're coming up to the end. Then we turn around, and you can walk it 1 stitch or 2 stitches. Then we come back the opposite way. Now, the beauty of this is that you only have 2 thread ends you have to manage. So if you have to gather quite a lot, you can really pull, and you don't have to worry about pulling the thread out of the stitches, which is so annoying. So here we are. Here we have our stitching. And you can see here, see how you really see the black thread? That's what you want, because that means the thread from the needle has popped below the fabric. And now we can just grab both of these white threads. Don't have to pull the black ones, just the white ones, Mara 30. And keep gathering. And you can distribute the gathering evenly. Now, if you're working in a smaller scale, you can use, I'd say maybe a 3.5 stitch to gather. But there you go. It's a quick and easy way of gathering. And it's a lot more attractive from this side. There you have it, gathering with Mara 30 thread. Here we have the ruffler installed onto the machine. You would look at your owner's manual on your machine to determine how to install it for your particular machine. But the thing I want to show you here that you need to make sure you do before you actually start running this is the thread placement. You can see here, there's the thread. There are 2 little leaves here. But the thread, you want the thread to go down and under the foot. There you go, like so. You can see both threads are now under the foot. This is very important, otherwise it's going to hang you up later. Next, I'm going to show you how to run this. It's such a cool machine. You will just so love and want one when you're done. There are 2 little springs. One slides on top of the other, and that's what creates the pleats. So I use a stiletto And the stiletto guides both, it guides the fabric between the two layers. Now you can see, if you look at the thread right there, one is on top, one is on bottom. That's extremely important. Then you lower the foot, and then the magic begins. You give a little tug on the thread to get it, to guide it through. But you can see the ruffler does the work. Now, the beauty of this is you can control how much fabric you take up in the ruffler by having it run pleat every 1 stitch, having it pleat every 6 stitches, or 1 every 12 stitches.
So what's your stitch length on your machine set at on that?
Well, now the stitch length is variable. I'm going to show in a moment. The general rule of to go by here is the shorter the stitch, the more fabric that is taken up in the ruffle. So, and you'll see,
Right, that makes sense.
yeah, and you'll see this in just a moment.
Also, if you adjust it to the 1, you can adjust stitch length. The general rule is the shorter the stitch length, the more fabric you take up into a shorter length. So this is something I would say experiment with it before you really go with your real fabric. It is one of those tools that I find it impossible to live without. Next, I'm going to give you a close-up so you can see the different take-ups on this. So here, as you can see, are the different pleats. 1 every 6, 1 every 12. And this is a take-up with every stitch, with a stitch length of 2.5, whereas this here, as you can see, it is take-up of every stitch, and the stitch length is 1.5. So look, see here, look at how much fabric goes into that ruffle. So stitch length, the shorter the stitch length, the closer the little pleats occur, the more fabric you can absorb into a ruffle. Whereas the longer the stitch, the less fabric is absorbed into the ruffle. So 2 different ways of ruffling your fabric. Now, one thing you'll notice here, after you have used the ruffler, what you have is this fringe in here that's a little bit raggedy. The object, what I'm going to be doing, I'll take it off camera and sew it, is you can trim all of this off and finish this with a pearl marrow. It's fairly easy to do. I will come back with the finished product. And we're back. So here you have, this is called a pearl marrow, or it's also called a 3-thread roll hem. Now you can just barely see right there where my thumbnail is. That is where the machine stitching that we sewed when we sewed it through the ruffler occurs. The object is to encase that stitching into the chain of the marrow. This way it finishes up the edge of this so that however you choose to sew it to whatever ground you're sewing it to, you'll have a nice clean finish. In closing, Zombie Francie shows that you can combine techniques. You don't have to stick with one or the other, but you can mix them up.
So questions?
That pearl marrow, is that on the sewing machine or
No,
a
on the-
serger?
On the serger, it would be a 3-thread roll hem, if for just because I did this also for FIT, and at FIT they have a pearl marrow machine, which is a 3-thread roll hem. So questions? Did we all enjoy Zombie Francie's modeling?
Yes.
Yes.
That was the only way I could think of to show it in a manageable form. Yeah, Lori, question.
On the, I just forget with the gathering, do you use a, it's regular thread on the top?
Yes, just a regular thread in the needle, and then the Amara 30 in the bobbin. I also use that same thing. Say if I want to mark for top stitching, I was talking about this in the raglan coat class, and so I will sew with a long machine base and loosen the top tension with the Mara 30 in the bobbin, so I can use that as a measuring device for pick stitching or saddle stitching, because it makes it very easy to pick out you just clip the bobbin thread at different places, and the bobbin thread comes out very quickly, so it's easy to rip out that stitching after you've sewn your pick stitching or saddle stitching.
Cool.
So, other questions? Is that a cat I see? What's Kitty's name?
Who has a cat on her lap?
Yeah, Meredith has a cat on her lap. Oh, there's. Okay, so other questions, comments, thoughts, hopes, fears, desires?
I'm afraid to use flame in my sewing area. I think I would go outside and do it. I'm not comfortable with it.
Well, you could go and do it on your stove.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I often singe things on my stove. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, yeah. Because see, I'm very, very conscious of flame, especially in this place, because this building was built around the time of the Civil War as a townhouse. It was a single family residence. So, I'm very careful because it would go up like that if, God forbid, something happened. So, yes, safety first.
Said you thought you heard somebody drop something. I think it was this person that dropped her bone that she's playing with.
Aww.
So I apologize. She's loud.
Okay.
I've had myself on mute because she's pitching a deer antler around and growling. So I muted myself so nobody else had to listen to the thunder. But anyway.
Okay. Oh, that's so cute. So, comments, questions. We have one more class next week. Is going to be twisted insertion.
I like
What is
this.
twisted insertion?
It's hard to describe, but it's kind of a way of, how can I explain it? You have the two pieces of fabric, you have a third piece of fabric that goes between, and then they're like bias.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
really pretty.
Yeah. So that's what we're covering next time. That's going to be our final lesson. So, and if anyone wants to show anything that they're making out of any of the techniques we've done these last few weeks, that would be the time to do some show and tell at the very end if you'd like to do that. You don't have to, there's no pressure, but if you're feeling compelled to, then that would be fun.
And
this has been so nice with COVID. I have to tell you, it's a really nice break in the middle of the week, and we do everything we can, I think, these days to keep ourselves into it and engaged, and this has been really, really fun.
Well, I have to say, having because I have the students at FIT in the daytime, and you all have your cameras on. I'm not looking at a whole bunch of boxes. I get to faces. These students, I have to just call on them, otherwise they don't turn their cameras on, and it's sort of like, really.
I think that's a generational thing. I find a lot. Yeah.
I don't know if it's just, maybe I'm just sounding like an old crank because I'm an old crank, but it's sort of like, give me a little something to work with, but it is what it is. But they kind of loosen up when you finally call on them and say, okay, I want to see your homework, because that's how I'm kind of keeping them honest. You see, it's a 4-hour class, but we have 1 hour class time, and then 3 hours. I have all the videos on YouTube, and they go on, and I tell them, it's like, you can FaceTime me, you can text me, you can email me. I'm here for the duration. So, you know, you have to get it because their midterm is coming.
Ah,
Yes, yes. Spring break is the last week of March, and so I've sent them the list. I'm like, this is what I expect to see.
So what's your assignment then to
Well,
have them use these?
they're creating if I were teaching it in like real time, they would create a binder, and at the end of the semester, they would have this binder with all of the different samples and their notes, and and I tell them, make it into a binder and make it, act like you really want this particular job. Because I've had students, which is kind of nice. I had a student come to my class one night. She said, "Professor, I have some news." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I'm working in the workrooms at Chanel on 57th Street."
wow.
Like, well, I'm not surprised. This young lady, her hand sewing, now my hand sewing's okay. I can make a passable job of it, but her hand sewing is like angels sew. She just has mad.
That's like Amanda. Amanda, when we were with Madame Gray's only surviving person, Madame Picot, and with Susan Calgi in Paris 3 years ago. And everybody, we made the little skirts and, with the jersey. And, all of us know how to sew. We all did a good job, but Amanda's